Today we're going to start moving away from chapter 5, which was our polynomial chapter, and we're moving into chapter 6, which is all about radical functions and different things about radical expressions and square roots, cube roots, and different rational exponents. So there's a lot of different things going on in chapter 6. But chapter 6, section 1, is roots and radical expressions. We start off chapter 6:1 with kind of the definition of what a radical is. And we think of like square root, cube root. We've seen that for a while now. But here's the actual definition. If we have a to the n power equals b, then a is what we call the nth root of b. So example here, if we had 2 to the 3rd power equals 8, we could also say 2 is the cube root, or you could also call it the 3rd root of 8. So just kind of a different way to think about it. We have our definition here. A couple of things to remember here. If n is odd, there is one root, only one root. So like the cube root of 8, for example, is 2. Or like the 5th root of, let's say 32, for example, is 2. Okay. If n is even, if we have an even root, things get a little complicated. We have two situations because we could have n is even, and if b is negative, like the square root of -4, for example, we learned back in chapter 4, it would have been back in chapter 4, that this is an imaginary. And in chapter 6, we're really just focusing with real numbers. So the fact that we know this is an imaginary, that's okay. We're, for this chapter, just going to say it's not real. However, if b is a positive number, there's going to be 2 roots. So, for example, the 4th root of 16 is 2. We have an even root. We have a positive number. The 4th root is 2, but it could also be -2. So we have 2 roots. Now, something to pay attention to is that if we said something like this, the square root of 16, even though we have an even root and we have a positive number, we still only think of this as being 4, because the fact that this is the square root is written there, it's implied that we're just talking about the positive. Where if we had something like this, the negative square root of 16, we would say that's -4, and it's implied here that we're just talking about the negative option. Okay, so hopefully you see the difference here. If you have the root actually written in, then we just care about whatever that sign is. So this one's the positive square root, it's just positive 4. This one's negative square root, it's just negative 4. But if you have in words the fourth root of 16, that's where we care about plus or minus. All right. So again, a couple extra examples here. The cube root of negative 1000. Cube root, that's an odd power. It's the third root, that's only going to have one option. And then what number to the third power is negative 1000? It's going to have to be negative since we have a negative number here. A negative times a negative times a negative will give us this, negative 10. And another example here, if we had the fourth root of 1, what number to the fourth power is 1? Well, it could be 1. It could also be negative 1. Okay. And this is another situation where we have an even root, a positive number. It's going to have our two possibilities, positive and negative. And again, hopefully you see the difference between having that written as the fourth root versus having the radical actually written